Well, just to pick up where David left off, in the 1940s, I was a Zionist youth leader, activist, and advocating exactly the same, pretty much the same positions. This is pre-48, with groups advocating a binationalist solution for the Arab-Israeli conflict. I was part of radical groups. We wanted a solution based on Arab-Jewish cooperation, working class cooperation, collective institutions, and so on. And I still think that's the right idea. And maybe someday we can get to it, so I don't think it's lost. I think it's delayed. But I'll talk about that. There are plenty of problems in the world for which it's extremely hard to even conjure up a solution. They're just too complex. And there are others that vary in complexity and difficulty. Some of them are actually pretty easy. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the easiest of all, because there is a short-term solution which is agreed upon by essentially everyone. It's accepted by the non-aligned countries, most of the countries of the world, by Europe, by the Arab League, by the Organization of Islamic States, which includes Iran. It's accepted by Hamas, the elected government of Palestine. In fact, it's universal. It's also accepted by international law. And that's quite clear. A series of Security Council resolutions, judgment of the World Court, with the U.S. Justice agreeing on the crucial element in a separate declaration. That's a degree of unanimity that's pretty hard to approach, but it isn't implemented. And it isn't implemented because there are two rejectionist states, the United States and Israel, which for the past 35 years have prevented the implementation of an overwhelming international consensus on a short-term solution. It's not the solution that David and I want to see, but I think it's the only possible step towards it, and it's a short-term solution. So the two states, the rejectionist states, are the United States and Israel. Israel's rejection of it is understandable. They'll continue to do so as long as the global superpower endorses, authorizes, and supports it. Now, I'll be talking about Israeli policies here, but when I say Israel, you should hear U.S. Israel. Israel can do essentially nothing without U.S. decisive U.S. military, economic, diplomatic, and ideological support. The ideological support is creation of a kind of an image that underlies the continued rejectionist stand. Actually, we see that today in the front page of every newspaper. There are supposed to be negotiations going on with the U.S. presented as the honest broker, trying to bring together the two recalcitrant opponents who can't get together. In a free society, people would laugh at this. I mean, if there were serious negotiations, there would be some neutral arbiter, maybe from Mars or something, and there would be two sides. One would be the world, and the other side would be the United States and Israel. And the two of them would have to come to terms, because that's exactly where the line has been drawn now for roughly 35 years. The basic elements of that solution are not really in any contention. It would be a settlement on the internationally recognized border, that's the pre-June 67 border called the Green Line, with, quote the official wording, with minor and mutual modifications. That official wording is the official U.S. policy from 1967 to 1971, when the United States was still part of the world. It separated itself at that point. But that was the official wording. It makes sense. The green line is a ceasefire line, so you straighten borders, things like that, and maybe some kinds of land swaps and so on. There are other questions. So, for example, take the allegedly contested question of Jerusalem, which again is on the front pages every day. Just today with the new programs of building there. That's contested in exactly the same way. The entire world and international law on one side, the US and Israel on the other side. In this case, it's not just Israel's actions, and again, remember, when I say Israel, you hear US-Israel. US-Israel actions in Jerusalem are doubly illegal. They're in violation of international law. Even Israel recognized this 40 years ago. And they're also in strict violation of a series of Security Council resolutions flatly rejecting them over and over again. You can, now that you have the internet, you look up UN resolutions concerning Israel, you get a long list of them. The crucial issue is the Geneva Conventions, which were established to criminalize Nazi actions, remember. That was what the Geneva Conventions were for. And they, among other things, made it a criminal action to change the legal, physical, demographic characteristics of any area under military occupation. That was directed against the Nazis, who had tried to do that in a hideous fashion, which you all know about. Well, the Geneva Conventions apply to the occupied territories. That's been established over and over again by it's accepted by all the countries I mentioned. It's repeatedly endorsed by the Security Council of the United Nations, the highest extra-legal authority, and by the International Court of Justice, unanimously. And in fact, Israel itself accepted this back in late 1967, right after the conquest of the territories, when the settlement programs were barely beginning. Israel's leading legal advisor, highly respected international lawyer, Theodor Meron, now on the international justice courts and so on, criminal courts. He was the legal advisor. He advised the government of Israel that any actions taken in the occupied territories were just in violation of fundamental international law. Israel's Attorney General, Shapiro, he agreed with this. Perhaps more interestingly, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister and in charge of the occupied territories, and one of the more dovish figures in the Israeli establishment, he agreed too. He said, yes, everything we're planning to do in the occupied territories and beginning to do is in violation of international law. But other countries have violated international law, so we'll do it too. And in fact, they can do it as long as the United States agrees. The United States actually endorsed those resolutions, but quietly said, don't worry about it. And that continues today. So the actions in Jerusalem, which are on the front pages, that's a double violation of fundamental international law. And the actions in the rest of the occupied territories, both the West Bank and Gaza, and of course the Golan Heights, which nobody talks about, but that's the subject of separate resolutions by the Security Council, also in gross violation of international law and international opinion, with the exception of the two rejectionist states. And since the U.S. is a very powerful state, it can dismiss international law and international opinion, as it does not only in this case, but on many other cases. Important topic in itself. Well, that means for those of you here who are American citizens, you're responsible for everything that's going on there. If there's a criminal act undertaken by the Israeli government, you're involved in a criminal act. Without that direct support, it can't continue. And the U.S. can, of course, determine that it will end easily. In fact, it's done it in a number of cases where Israeli actions conflicted with U.S. desires. That much is pretty clear. So there is a solution, short-term solution. We know what it is. The thing that's blocking it is the United States and its Israeli ally. I think that's, just don't take my word for it. Just take a look at the record. It's pretty clear, it's basically uncontroversial. You can decide you don't like it, that's okay, it's different, but then say so. Be like Moshe Dayan. Say, well, we know it's illegal and criminal, but we're going to do it anyway, because we have the international godfather on our side. So that's an honest approach towards supporting the actions that are taking place in the occupied territories. And if you want to support them, that's the position you should take. Well, just a few words about the history. I'll, of course, skim the surface. There's plenty of detail that's not added. If you'd like, we can go into it more in the discussion. 1960, we're talking about the occupation, so we begin in 1967. There's deeper questions, but those are on the side for the purposes of this discussion. June 1967, Israel conquered what are now the occupied territories, the West Bank, Gaza, Golan Heights. The immediate aftermath I've just described in the legal system. Shortly after that, settlement began. At that time, there was rejectionism on all sides, and nobody was talking about a settlement. That changed in 1971. A very important event, which has kind of been whitewashed out of official history. That's part of the ideological support for the U.S.-Israeli actions. But it happened, and it's important. In fact, I think it's one of the most important events in Israel's history. In February 1971, Egypt, President Sadat of Egypt, offered Israel a full peace treaty, nothing for the Palestinians. The Palestinians at that time were considered only refugees, no issue of Palestinian national rights. In return, he called for Israeli withdrawal from, he said, the occupied territories, but all he cared about was Sinai, Egyptian Sinai. That became very clear a year later when Jordan made the same offer. It said, yes, full peace treaty if you withdraw from the Jordanian, the territories that Jordan had held before the '67 war. So Israel at that point had an extremely significant choice. It could have had full security. With Egypt out of the conflict, there's no more military threat. Egypt was the only substantial Arab military force. With Jordan out of the conflict too, the next year that sort of ends it. It gets about as much security as any state can hope to have. So they had a chance for full security, but at the cost of expansion. They had to make a choice between expansion and security. Very clear choice. At that point, the expansion was mostly into the Sinai. We've sort of forgotten that now. But at that point, the labor government, Golda Meir's government, was beginning to initiate large-scale development projects in the Northeast Sinai. They were planning to establish a huge city, a city of 1 million people, Yamit, on the Mediterranean, and a series of settlements, including kibbutzim, all over that region of the north of the Egyptian Sinai. In preparation for that, the Israeli army had brutally expelled the people who were living there, Bedouins. You think of Bedouins as people wandering around. No, they had towns, settled communities, agricultural areas. They were simply forcefully driven into the desert and in preparation for these building projects. And that's what Sadat had in mind. He said, well, if you withdraw from these regions, then you can have full peace. So Israel had to make a decision. Do we want expansion, mostly into the Sinai, or do we want security, which we can have right now? And they decided on expansion.